I used to play Knock, Knock, Knocking on Heaven's Door. We used to do that with Harry Dean Stanton. And I was in the band with him. Funny thing about Dylan, uh, back in 1992, 93, I got a call. Some town scouts came out to one of my shows, and they were looking for band members for Bruce Springsteen. He was putting it was around the time when the E Street Band broke up, and he was going to go solo or something. And so for a few years, he was on his own, and he put a new band together. And he got a girl named Debbie Gold, who was an agent for kind of like a headhunter. Went out to put bands together for people like Mick Jagger and just different people. And she was hired by Springsteen to go put a band together and scout New York and LA. So they were out looking for people, and she saw me and said, "We want you to bring you in." And so I remember I gave her my number, I think at the club. Anyway, they called me a couple days later. They go, "Hey, we want you to come in and have a meeting with Bruce." And I said, "No, I don't want to play with Bruce Springsteen. I don't want to be in this band. I was just thinking, like, what am I going to do? Go play with somebody else?" At that point, So anyways, it got back to Bruce that I guess he had asked. Hey, did anybody turn me down? Because it was a big deal in L.A. People had heard this whole thing about Bruce putting a band together. Everybody was trying to get an audition, and out of the whole audition process, the only person who actually turned it down was me. And so it got back. They ended up calling me and saying, "Hey, we were talking to Bruce, and Bruce asked." It kind of was a joke. Did anybody turn me down? They said, "Yeah, the one guy did." And he said, "Well, who is it? Who is this guy?" And they said, "His name is James Intveld." And I guess Bruce's response was, "Oh, James Intveld, yeah, man. Well, he wouldn't want to play with me because he's got his own band. He plays, his own music." Which, when they called me and told me that, I was just completely blown away that he even had any clue who I was. And I guess later, when I met with him, he told me he came to Lingerie and he would watch me play down there on Art Fine. Would have Wednesday nights at Club Lingerie in Hollywood, and Bruce would come in there once in a while from time to time. He'd be looking through the LA Weekly, and he'd find things to go see, and he'd go check out bands. So I guess he came out there and saw me play, and so he was already aware of me, which was pretty cool. Anyways, so I turned that down, and then they wanted to set up a meeting with me and Bruce anyways, because Bruce wanted to kind of just hang out and maybe talk to me about doing some other project with him. I think they wanted to. Originally, they had called me up to maybe play bass in his band, and then they said, "Oh, we got a bass player, but how about you playing acoustic guitar, working off of Bruce, and singing harmony with him, because Clarence is not going to be on this tour either. So maybe you could be like his yin and yang on the stage. You can do, dress like you do, motorcycle boots and jeans, and rock out up there with him." And I said, "Well, I don't really want to do that either." And they just thought I was crazy. But I said, "But I will come and have a meeting. I would love to come and do that." They said, "Okay, well, let's set it up for tomorrow." And I went down there and I met Bruce, and we ended up becoming friends because of it, which was really, really cool. He just wanted to kind of meet and hang out, and he'd come down on a few occasions and sat in with me on my gig. Which brings me to the point of what the story is about. I'm talking about Bob Dylan. So I get a call from Debbie Gold, the gal that was putting together that band, and she's called me. She says, "Okay." She says, "I got a session with Bob Dylan. I need to bring in a male singer, and I want you to go in and do it. Will you do it?" She goes, I trust you because you already turned Bruce down, so I'm not worried about you getting weird around Bob Dylan." I said, "Yeah, if you want me to go in there to do a session with him, cool." I said, "When is it?" She goes, "Oh, it was on I think it was on a Monday, or whatever the day it was. It was on the same day as Elvis's birthday. And I do my Elvis birthday party show every year. So I was like, this is the day you want to do the session with Bob Dylan. It's on the same night that I have to do my show at the club. It was actually at the Club Andre still. So I went down to the Club Lingerie and I set everything up. I got everybody going, started the show, and I bolted out of there and went right down to Santa Monica to the Bob Dylan session. And I walked in the door, and there's Bob. It was Bob and Jim Keltner on drums and Tim Drummond's playing bass. So I came in there and I sat down and, actually I walked in and I hadn't even been in the room more than 30 seconds and Jim Keltner's giving me this kind of like nod with a head like, come over here. And I walk over to the drums, he goes, and he knew me from before. Me and Jim Keltner had met. He's like one of the top session drummers and he says, you play drums, don't you? And I said, yeah. He goes, here, play my kit right now. He says, and I want to tune a couple of the drums. So right now, you know, he stopped playing and Bob was still playing guitar and Tim was still playing bass. And I literally just jumped in his chair and started playing his drums. And he was out there tuning it. I hadn't been in the room longer than maybe at that point 45 seconds, and I'm playing drums with Bob Dylan and Tim Drummond. And I played with them for a while. And then when Bob kind of stopped the song, kind of looked up and saw me up there, and he's like, hey man. And so I came over and I met him. I met Tim as well. And then Bob says, all right, we're going to work on a couple songs. And anyways, we did a session that day with a bunch of these lyrics that he wanted me to sing. He wanted to hear somebody else singing while he was playing guitar and working things out. We were in there for a while, and I'm thinking, oh, my Elvis show is happening. So the whole time I'm working at the session with Bob Dylan, I'm thinking, I've got to be running my show, introducing guests, playing behind them, doing my Elvis show. Because back then, when we do those Elvis shows, I'd have about 30 guests, and they would be all kind of celebrities that would come down and donate their time, and we would raise money and give it to the homeless. So I was just kind of sitting there looking at the clock the whole time, and the gal, Debbie Gold, came back into the room. She says, hey, Bob, how much longer do you want to go tonight, you know? And he says, probably maybe a couple hours. And I was like, what? I'm thinking, what do I do? And I said, well, I looked at him and I looked at her and I said, I can't really, I said, I thought, you know, I didn't know we were going to be here that long. I said, I actually have to be somewhere. And the room was like, you could cut it with a knife, man. Everybody was like, what are you talking about? And I said, and Bob looked at me, he looked at her, and he said, oh, okay. Well, we'll cut off now. And boy, as soon as I said that, Bob was in a good mood. And he came over and started talking to me. First, he was kind of blowing me off a little bit, like, oh, who's this guy, you know, that I've on my session and whatever. And now all of a sudden, he loved it, that the fact that I said I had to go. And he said, well, what is it you're doing? I said, I'm doing an Elvis show at the Club Lingerie, and I've got like all these people like Dwight Yoakam and the band Los Lobos on, and I've got Tommy Sands is on my show, Johnny Rivers, and he loved it. And we started talking. He said, hey, tell me more about the show, and hey, do me a favor when you see Tommy Sands, tell him I said hi, and then he lit a joint up and took a puff off the joint and he handed it to me. And I was like, man, I gotta go to my show. But I thought, oh, well, you know, Bob Dylan's handing me a joint. So I took the joint and I smoked the joint with Bob Dylan here back and forth, and just kind of telling him what was going on with my show. And then I asked him, I go, what are these songs that we're working on? He said, oh, these are just some old tunes that I'm kind of trying to revisit, he says, to kind of come up with new stuff for a new album. And we were recording everything. When we were recording, when we were in there playing stuff, it was all going to the tape machine, and he was listening back to it to see what it sounded like. That's why he wanted my vocal on there, because he wanted to hear what the vocal parts sounded like, and he didn't want to be bothered having to sing them. Anyways, so that was my Bob Dylan deal, and after that, he just said, hey man, good to meet you, and I literally turned and walked out the door, jumped in my car, and jammed down to the Club Lingerie, and ran in there and ran back on stage, and I had, you know, a few people filling in for me, and boy, I'll tell you, I was late to my own show, but I had to get out of the Bob Dylan session. So anyways, that's That's one of my Bob Dylan. I got another Bob Dylan story too, but I'll keep that for another time. I won't